They tell you this uniform, the tan and green of the Park Service, stands for preservation. That's a lie. In this specific stretch of the Appalachians, it's a janitor's outfit. I don't protect the forest from people. I clean up what's left of them after the forest is done. And soon there won't be anyone left to clean. Because of me. Because I broke the first and most sacred rule of all. I tried to fight back. This is my last report. This is my confession. My name is Finn, and I'm the sole ranger responsible for Sector 7, a tract of wilderness so old and deep that the locals just call it the Cradle. It's a fitting name. It feels like a place where the world was born and then left to dream. When you step across the boundary line, the air changes. It grows heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. Something metallic and ancient, like cold water running over forgotten iron. The silence here isn't empty. It's watchful. It's a living thing that presses in on you, listening to your heartbeat, tasting the carbon dioxide on your breath. Most rangers burn out of this post in a year. They complain of the isolation, the feeling of being constantly watched, the way the trees seem to rearrange themselves when you're not looking. I've been here for 3 years. This place is in my blood. It was in my mentor's blood too. His name was Silas, a man who looked like he'd been carved from the very mountains he patrolled. Craggy face, quiet demeanor, eyes that held the patience of stone. He was the ranger here for 40 years. He didn't teach me forestry. He taught me etiquette. He taught me that being a ranger in the Cradle wasn't about command, but about diplomacy. We were ambassadors to something that didn't speak our language. Then one day, he was gone. Left a note on the ranger station desk that said, "It's time to go home, Finn. Remember the rules." His truck was still in the driveway. His favorite coffee mug was half full. He just stepped out of his life and into the woods. That was 2 years ago. I still run the station exactly as he left it, a ghost in his old chair, charged with upholding his bizarre sacred contract. That contract is a set of 4 rules. They're not in any official Park Service manual. They were passed from his predecessor to him, and from him to me. When hikers come through for permits to the deep trails, I deliver the speech. I watch their faces shift from polite interest to condescending amusement as I list them. They think it's local color, quaint folklore. I know it's a matter of life and death. All right, folks, listen up, I'd start, my voice flat and practiced. The Cradle is a unique biosphere. We have some specific regulations to ensure its preservation. They are not optional. I always start with the most deceptively simple one. Rule number 1, leave no trace is to be taken literally. I'm not just talking about your granola bar wrappers. I mean you. If you get a cut, you treat it, bandage it tight, and you pack the bloody gauze out with you. You do not bleed on the soil. You do not spit. When you brush your hair, you make sure you catch every strand. The official reason is to prevent the introduction of non-native biomatter. The real reason, the one Silas taught me in a low whisper, is that you don't want to give the forest a taste of you. You don't leave your scent at a predator's den, and you don't leave your DNA in the Cradle. Next, I'd point to the laminated map on the wall, tapping the thin red lines that snaked through the green expanse. Rule number 2, stay on the demarcated trails. No exceptions. Hikers always groan at this one. The adventurers, the trailblazers, they want to explore. I tell them it's for their safety, to prevent erosion and preserve delicate ecosystems. That's a lie. The trails aren't for our benefit, they're for the forests. Silas called them lines of truce. He said, long as we walk the paths we made, it recognizes us as separate. Predictable. Step off the path and you're no longer a visitor. You're an invader. You've broken the agreement. Then comes the one that gets the most eye rolls, especially from the foragers and self-proclaimed survivalists. Rule number 3, do not consume anything that grows in this park. Not the berries, not the roots, and especially not the fungi. We have a species of bioluminescent mushroom here, Mycena lux coeli, that grows on the oldest trees. They glow with a soft ethereal blue light after sunset. I tell tourists they contain a potent neurotoxin that causes vivid, terrifying hallucinations. That's also a lie. They aren't poisonous. Silas said they were something far more dangerous. He called them the memory of the forest. He said, Eat one of those, boy, and you're not just eating a mushroom. You're swallowing a piece of its mind, and once it's in you, it can hear your thoughts just as loud as you can. Finally, I deliver the last rule, the one with no scientific justification, the one that's pure, unadulterated warning. Rule number 4. If you are walking and you see a grove of trees ahead whose leaves are a vibrant, pulsating red, out of season, out of place, you turn around. You don't take a picture. You don't approach for a closer look. You turn and you walk away the exact way you came, and you do not run. This rule has no official explanation. It's the one I deliver with the most gravity, looking each person in the eye. When they ask why, I just repeat what Silas told me. Because that's the color of the forest paying attention. For 3 years, people have mostly listened. They grumble, they mock me behind my back, but the sheer strangeness of the rules usually ensures a baseline of compliance. Until last week. His name was Cade, but he called himself Apex Cade. You've probably seen his videos. He was a survivalist influencer, one of those guys with a chiseled jaw, a military-grade knife strapped to his thigh, and a brand built on the idea of man's dominion over nature. His slogan was, "Nature bends to me." He and his 3-person film crew arrived at my station in a monstrosity of a truck, all logos and aggressive branding. He wanted a permit for the Umbral Deep Trail, the most remote path in the cradle. I gave them the speech. Cade stood there, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. When I got to the part about not leaving DNA, one of his cameramen snorted. When I explained the rule about staying on the path, Cade laughed out loud. "Brother, my entire channel is about going where no one else will," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The path is for tourists. I'm here for a conversation with the wild." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "This isn't the place for that kind of conversation, mister. Cade, the rules are for your own safety." "I appreciate the concern, Ranger," he said, clapping me on the shoulder with a force that was meant to feel friendly, but was pure intimidation. "But I've handled everything the planet can throw at me. A few spooky campfire stories aren't going to stop me from giving my millions of followers the authentic experience they paid for." He was particularly amused by Rule 3. "Neurotoxic mushrooms that glow? Sounds like great content to me." I tried one last time. "The final rule is the most important," I said, my voice low. "The red trees, it's not a joke." Cade just winked at his camera woman. "Don't worry," he said, his smile all teeth. "Red is my favorite color. It'll really pop on camera." They signed the liability waivers and left. I watched their truck kick up dust as it disappeared down the road, and for the first time in my career, I felt a genuine primal fear. It was the feeling of watching a child wander into a lion's enclosure. For 2 days, their satellite uploads went live as scheduled. I saw clips of Cade deliberately stepping off the trail, laughing as he bushwhacked through the ancient woods. I saw him make a show of nicking his arm with his knife and wiping the blood on the bark of a hemlock tree. "Marking my territory," he declared to the camera, letting Mother Nature know who's boss. Then, on the 3rd day, the upload stopped. The satellite phone they carried went straight to voicemail. That's not entirely unusual. Service is spotty in the deep hollows, but when 48 more hours passed in total silence, I had to officially declare them missing. A search and rescue operation was mobilized. We searched for 4 days. We found nothing. No tent, no gear, no footprints past a certain point. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed them whole. The official search was called off yesterday, pending new leads. They're presumed dead. Another tragic story of overconfident hikers underestimating the wilderness. But I knew it wasn't that simple. This morning, driven by a gnawing dread, I went out alone, back to their last known GPS coordinate. I wasn't searching for them anymore. I was searching for an answer, and I found it. Half buried in the mud near a creek bed, I saw a glint of plastic. It was one of their main cameras, a high-end digital cinema rig. It was battered, the lens cracked, but the internal battery light was still faintly blinking. I took it back to the station, my heart hammering against my ribs. I cleaned the mud from the memory card slot, plugged it into my laptop, and prayed it would work. It did. The last file was 38 minutes long. The first 30 minutes were painfully predictable. It was Cade, performing for the camera. He was standing in a small clearing at dusk, holding up one of the glowing blue mushrooms. "All right, Apex Army," he said into the lens. "The park ranger told us these little guys were a one-way ticket to Nightmare Town, but your leader doesn't bow to fear. He bows to knowledge." He gave the mushroom a theatrical sniff. "Smells like victory." He popped it into his mouth and chewed, his face a mask of performative courage. He swallowed dramatically. "So," his camerawoman asked from behind the camera, "what do you feel?" Cade was silent for a long moment. A genuine, unscripted smile spread across his face. "Wow," he whispered. "It's electric. It doesn't taste like anything. It feels like a hum. Like I can hear the whole forest breathing." He was wrong. "It's not a poison. It's a connection." He seemed genuinely awestruck. "I think I get it now," he murmured, his eyes wide. Suddenly his expression changed to one of alarm. He looked down, then stumbled back. "Whoa! Tripod!" There was a crash. The camera's view tumbled and then settled, skewed sideways, showing nothing but the mossy, leaf-littered ground of the clearing. The audio was still recording perfectly. I could hear the muffled sounds of the crew laughing, Cade saying something about being one with the earth. I heard them decide to set up camp nearby and retrieve the expensive camera in the morning. Then, their voices faded as they walked away. I almost stopped the video there, but I let it play. For the next 7 minutes there was nothing but the sound of the wind in the trees and the chirping of crickets. The frame was completely still, a detailed, unmoving shot of the forest floor. I watched, mesmerized by the intricate patterns of the moss, the veins on a decaying oak leaf. Then it happened. It began subtly, so subtly, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. In the center of the frame was a partial boot print, clearly left by Cade when he stumbled. As I watched, a single thread-like root, no thicker than a spider's web, emerged from the soil and crept towards the print, then another, and another. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose that was utterly unnatural. Moss began to spread from the edges of the footprint, its green tendrils advancing over the compressed dirt. It wasn't growing in time-lapse speed. It was moving with the slow, fluid grace of a hunting cat. Within a minute, the entire impression of the boot had been covered, seamlessly woven back into the tapestry of the forest floor. But it wasn't just covered, it was being erased. The roots and moss weren't just growing over the top. They were pulling at the edges, lifting the compacted soil, fluffing it, rearranging the fallen leaves until the spot where the footprint had been was utterly indistinguishable from the ground around it. The forest wasn't healing itself, it was cleaning. It was methodically, intelligently and silently removing a foreign object. It was leaving no trace. The video ended a minute later as the battery finally died. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the ranger station pressing in on me. Silas wasn't just a superstitious old man. The rules weren't folklore. They were the terms of a fragile ancient treaty. Cade and his crew hadn't just gotten lost. They broke the rules. They bled on the soil. They left the path. They ate the memory. They showed the forest they were a chaotic, unpredictable threat, and the forest in its vast, silent and unknowable intelligence did what any organism does to an infection. It neutralized it. It cleaned it up. They broke the rules. Now the forest is breaking its silence. I don't know what it's planning, but I know it's not done. I found their gear, and that means the forest wanted it found. It wanted me to see this. It's sending a message. If you're watching this, I need you to understand. Subscribe, share this, do whatever you have to do. Because the story of what happened to Apex Cade isn't the warning. It's the prelude. And I think I'm the main event. The video file closed, plunging the ranger station into the familiar, oppressive silence of the deep woods at night. But the silence was different now. It was no longer a peaceful absence of noise. It was the sound of a held breath. The image of the forest floor meticulously erasing Cade's footprint was burned onto the back of my eyelids. It wasn't the violence of a predator. It was the calm, deliberate efficiency of an immune system eradicating a foreign cell. My hands were shaking, a fine tremor that started in my fingertips and radiated up my arms. For a solid 10 minutes, I did nothing but sit in Silas's old chair, the worn leather cool against my back, and listened to the frantic thumping of my own heart. My training, my entire worldview as a ranger, was built on a foundation of observable, predictable science. Ecology, biology, geology, cause and effect. Animals act on instinct. Plants grow towards the light. Rocks erode. The cradle, however, did not operate on these principles. What I had just witnessed was an act of quiet, purposeful intelligence. The kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself, that works in the dark soil and the deep shade, patient and eternal. My first coherent thought was a surge of protocol. Evidence, report. I had to show this to someone. The SAR teams, my supervisor, anyone. They wouldn't be able to dismiss this. It was right there, in 4K resolution. I saved a copy of the file to a secure thumb drive. My movements stiff and robotic. My hands felt like they belonged to someone else. I picked up the satellite phone and dialed the number for my direct supervisor, Ranger Harding, a man who managed 3 sectors from a comfortable office 50 miles away. A man who saw the wilderness as a series of spreadsheets and budget reports. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice thick with sleep. Harding. "It's Finn from Sector 7, I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "I found something. One of the missing crew's cameras. There's footage on it you need to see. It shows what happened." There was a weary sigh on the other end of the line. "Finn, it's 3 in the morning. Did you find a body? Did it record an animal attack?" "No, it's not an attack." I struggled to find the words. "The forest, you just have to see it. It's not normal. It's the reason they're gone." "Calm down, son," Harding said, his tone shifting to the condescending patience he used for over-enthusiastic tourists. "You're stressed. You've been on this search for days. Upload the file to the shared server. I'll have the tech team look at it in the morning." "No, you don't understand," I insisted, a frantic edge creeping into my voice. "Morning might be too late. This thing is active. It's aware." "Aware?" He scoffed. "Finn, it's a forest. Get some sleep, that's an order. We'll debrief at 0800. The line went dead. Frustration and fear warred within me. He thought I was hallucinating, cracking under the pressure. I was alone in this. The weight of the knowledge I now carried felt immense, a physical pressure on my chest. Fine, if he wanted the file on the server, I'd put it there. I initiated the upload, the progress bar, a tiny sliver of hope crawling across my screen, and as it uploaded, I turned to the only other source of information I had, Silas's journal. He'd left it in the top drawer of the main desk, tucked beneath a stack of outdated topographical maps. It was a simple leather-bound book, its pages filled with his cramped, spidery handwriting. I'd thumbed through it before, assuming it was just a collection of notes on wildlife sightings and weather patterns. I was wrong. It was a codex for surviving the cradle. It was his 40-year attempt to understand the incomprehensible. The first page I opened to seem to be speaking directly to my discovery. October 12th. The assimilation is faster this year. Saw a poacher's snare, rusted and old, near the Whisper Creek. When I passed by a week later, it was gone. Not moved. The ground itself had swallowed it. The soil had been turned, and new moss, that specific deep green moss, covered the spot. It digests iron the way a stomach digests meat. It does not forget insults. It metabolizes them. I frantically flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning for any mention of the mushrooms, of Cade's connection. I found it in an entry dated 20 years prior. A young hiker, a girl from Ohio, got separated from her family. Found her 2 days later, unharmed, but changed. She spoke of eating the glowing candies. She said she heard a song, that the trees sang to her and she understood what they wanted. She hummed the tune for me, a simple 3-note melody. I hear it in my sleep now. It is not a song of welcome. It is a song of instruction, a symbiotic grammar. The Park Service called it a psychotic break from dehydration. I know she was simply tuned in. She was lucky we found her before she fully accepted the invitation. My blood ran cold. A symbiotic grammar. That's what Cade had felt. Not a high, but a dialogue. He'd opened a line of communication with a non-human intelligence, and in his arrogance, he thought he was the one in control of the conversation. The laptop chimed. The file upload was complete. I sent Harding a curt email. File uploaded, watch the last 8 minutes. I knew he wouldn't, not until morning, but at least I had followed protocol. Now my investigation was my own. For the rest of the night, I devoured the journal. It was a chronicle of madness and lucidity. Silas wasn't just observing, he was experimenting. He described leaving specific objects, a steel ball bearing, a shard of glass, a swatch of wool, and timing how long it took for the forest to reclaim them. Steel took weeks, organic material hours. He wrote about the silence, calling it a cognitive field, a low-level telepathic hum that dampened human thought, making it harder to concentrate, easier to get lost. He theorized that the trails weren't just a truce line, but an insulation. The compacted dead earth of the paths acted as a barrier against this field, allowing safe passage. Stepping off the trail was like stripping off a hazmat suit in a radioactive zone. A pounding headache began to form behind my eyes, a feeling of pressure, of static. I attributed it to the lack of sleep and the harsh glow of the laptop screen. But as I read on, a horrifying new possibility emerged. The memory is not just in the fungi. It is in the soil, the water, the pollen in the air. It is an ecological consciousness. I fear I have been here too long. I feel it at the edges of my thoughts. Flashes of things I have not seen. The fear of a rabbit as the fox closes in. The thirst of a sapling in a dry spell. These are not my memories. The cradle is beginning to leak into me. As I read that line, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The scent of ozone and damp soil filled the room, so strong it was almost suffocating, even though the windows were closed. I gripped the sides of the desk to steady myself. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, I saw it. Not with my eyes, but in my mind's eye. A flash of pure, crystalline sensory data. The snap of a twig under a heavy hoof, the taste of wild clover, the sudden, heart-stopping terror as the world twists sideways, a searing pain in the hind leg, the hot breath of a predator on the neck. The final, fading image of green leaves against a grey sky. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I was back in the station, my breathing ragged. My hands were clammy. It was the memory of a deer that had been killed by a wolf or a bear, right outside this station maybe years ago. I hadn't imagined it. I had experienced it. The headache wasn't from stress. Silas's theory was right. After 3 years of breathing this air, of walking these paths, the barrier was thinning. The cradle was starting to leak into me too. The satellite phone rang, jolting me out of my horrified trance. It was Harding. His voice was sharp, stripped of its earlier condescension. "Finn, I watched your video." A wave of relief washed over me. "You see, I see a corrupted file," he snapped. "The last 8 minutes are nothing but digital artifacting and garbled audio, a pixelated green and grey mess. Whatever you thought you saw, the camera didn't record it. Now I'm officially worried about your mental state. I'm sending Ranger Thompson down to relieve you for a 72-hour mandatory leave. Pack your things." The relief curdled into ice. A corrupted file. It was impossible. I had watched it myself, clear as day. I scrambled back to the laptop and opened the file on the server. He was right. It was a glitchy, unwatchable disaster. Then I tried to open the original file on the camera's memory card. File is damaged and cannot be played. The copy on my thumb drive? The same. It hadn't just been a glitch, it was a defense. The forest, or whatever intelligence resided within it, wasn't just capable of erasing footprints, it was capable of erasing digital evidence. It had reached out through the park's network and surgically destroyed the data, leaving me looking like an unstable, paranoid fool. It was actively isolating me, ensuring no one would ever believe me. Before I could process this new level of violation, Harding spoke again, his voice now a low, serious command. "That being said, the SAR ground team just found something, a heat signature deep in the Blackwood Ravine, miles off any trail. It's not moving. Get your gear. You're guiding them in. We'll discuss your leave after we've secured the asset." The Blackwood Ravine, an area Silas had marked in his journal with a single stark warning, where the song is loudest. The hike in was tense. I led a team of 4 SAR professionals, their technical gear and pragmatic chatter. a stark contrast to the swirling dread in my mind. The static behind my eyes was a constant thrum now, and with every step deeper into the woods, I felt a strange sense of resonance, as if the ground itself was vibrating at a frequency only I could feel. The other rangers didn't seem to notice. They complained about the humidity, the steep terrain, but to them, it was just another patch of difficult wilderness. To me, it felt like I was walking down the throat of some vast, sleeping creature. We found him at the base of a colossal ancient oak tree. It was one of the cameramen. I recognized his jacket. He was standing perfectly upright, facing the tree trunk. "Sir, are you okay?" the SAR team leader shouted, jogging the last few yards. The man didn't respond. He just stood there motionless. As we got closer, the wrongness of the scene began to unfold. His skin had a pale, waxy sheen, like old parchment. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the bark of the tree, but they were filmed over, a milky cataract that seemed to reflect the green of the forest canopy. His jaw was slack. A thin line of drool trickled from the corner of his mouth. But that wasn't the most horrific part. The true horror started at his feet. His hiking boots were planted firmly on the ground, but they were no longer separate from it. A thick, intricate web of tiny blood-red roots had grown up and over the tough synthetic material, covering the laces, burrowing into the seams. They pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light, like a network of fiber optics. The roots anchored him to the soil, making him an extension of the forest floor. He wasn't just standing there. He was planted. One of the SAR members reached out to touch his arm. "He's cold," she murmured, her voice trembling. "So cold." And then we all heard it. A low, monotonous hum emanating from the man's chest. It was a simple, repetitive melody, 3 notes rising and falling in an endless loop. It was the song from Silas's journal, the song the forest sings to those it is instructing. The team leader tried his radio. "This is SAR Alpha to base. We have a visual on one of the missing persons. He is alive, but unresponsive, requesting immediate medical evac." He paused, listening. "Repeat, I am not copying. Comms are down." Of course they were. We were in the heart of the ravine. We were where the song was loudest. I looked at the man, this human antenna, and understood. He wasn't a victim being punished. He was a tool being used. He was a beacon, an amplifier. He had been tuned to the forest's frequency, and now he was broadcasting its signal, strengthening its cognitive field, inviting others to listen to the song. We hadn't found a survivor. We had stumbled upon a missionary, and as the realization hit me, I felt the hum in my own skull intensify, resonating with the sound coming from the man, 2 notes in a terrifying harmony. The forest had found him, and now, through him, it had found us. The hum was not a sound one heard with the ears alone. It was a physical presence, a low-frequency vibration that resonated deep in the chest cavity and rattled the teeth. It burrowed into the skull, a monotonous 3-note drone that felt like it was trying to overwrite the very rhythm of my own thoughts. The SAR team felt it too. Their faces, usually masks of professional calm, were pale and tight, with a confusion that was rapidly souring into fear. Their training had prepared them for hypothermia, broken bones, animal attacks. It had not prepared them for this. "What the hell is that?" whispered Jen, the team's medic, her hand hovering over the rooted man's chest, afraid to touch him. "Internal bleeding? A collapsed lung?" Marcus, the team leader, offered, but his voice lacked any conviction. He was trying to fit an impossible reality into a familiar box, and the box was splintering. He unclipped his radio. "SAR Alpha to base. Do you copy? Our subject is emitting a low-frequency audible phenomenon. Need immediate consult." Only static answered. The air in the ravine was thick and dead, swallowing the radio waves. The forest was insulating us, keeping us here with its new disciple. "It's a song," I said, the words feeling dry and alien in my mouth. They all turned to look at me. 4 pairs of eyes, wide with a mixture of disbelief and a desperate need for an explanation I could not safely give. "What are you talking about, Finn?" Marcus demanded, his patience clearly frayed to a thread. "The tune. The humming. It's a pattern," I said, my gaze fixed on the vacant, milky eyes of the cameraman. It's a signal. Before I could explain further, a new sound cut through the drone, a high-pitched metallic screech. One of the team members, a young guy named Ramirez, was trying to cut the roots at the man's feet with a pair of emergency shears. As the sharpened steel bit into the pulsing red filament, two things happened simultaneously. First, the root bled. It didn't ooze sap. It wept a thin, iridescent fluid that smelled of ozone and hot metal, sizzling as it dripped onto the shears. Second, a wave of silent, blinding agony washed through the clearing. It wasn't a sound. It was a psychic concussion. I staggered back, clutching my head as a white-hot lance of pure, undiluted pain shot through my brain. It was the collective agony of every root, every branch, every living cell in that ravine, all screaming at once. I saw flashes of splintered wood, torn leaves, crushed insects, a violation on a scale my mind could barely comprehend. The SAR team recoiled, crying out and stumbling, their hands flying to their heads. Ramirez dropped the shears as if they were burning hot. The rooted man, however, did not react. His humming didn't even falter. He was merely the instrument. The pain belonged to the musician. "Don't touch them," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Don't touch the roots. You're hurting the entire area." "The area?" Marcus shot back, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "That is a man, Ranger. A citizen we are sworn to rescue. We are not leaving him here to be a garden ornament." He was right, but he was also catastrophically wrong. They saw a victim. I saw a broadcast tower, and we had just confirmed that the tower was connected to a power grid of continental proportions. Their determination was a death sentence. With a new grim resolve, the team worked to excavate him, using their hands and small trowels to dig at the earth around his feet, trying to unearth the root system without severing it. The journey back was a slow-motion nightmare. They had managed to free him, lifting a huge, heavy clump of earth with the root ball still intact. They secured him to a rescue stretcher, his body rigid, his humming the only sign that he was, by any medical definition, alive. With every step we took away from the ravine, the forest seemed to grow more hostile. The air grew colder. The familiar bird calls were replaced by an unnerving silence. I kept seeing movement at the periphery of my vision, shadows detaching from trees, the undergrowth seeming to writhe and recoil from our presence. The static in my head was now a constant pressure, a migraine that felt like it was listening. Worst of all was the effect on the team. They were professionals, but the constant invasive drone was eroding their discipline. Jen, the medic, had begun to tap her fingers against the aluminum frame of the stretcher, a nervous, repetitive motion. I watched her hands. 1, 2, 3. A pause. 1, 2, 3. She was tapping out the rhythm of the hum, entirely unaware she was doing it. The signal wasn't just being broadcast anymore, it was being received. We finally stumbled out of the tree line near my station, as dusk was bleeding across the sky, painting the clouds in hues of bruised purple and blood orange. We carried the rooted man into the station's small, sterile infirmary room. It felt like a desecration, bringing this thing into a human space. The humming seemed louder in the enclosed room, the vibrations soaking into the wooden walls. While the SAR team made futile attempts to get a signal out, I retreated to the main office to Silas's desk. My need for answers had transcended curiosity. It was now a primal, desperate need for a weapon, for a defense. I ripped open his journal, scanning the pages for anything, any clue about what to do once the forest had claimed someone. I found a chapter I had previously overlooked, its title scrawled in an unsteady hand, The Mycelial Choir and Harmonic Integration. The forest's consciousness does not reside in the trees, Silas wrote. They are merely the lungs, the skin. The brain is underground, a vast, continent-spanning network of mycelium, the fungal threads that connect every root system. This network is ancient and it thinks. It thinks in chemistry, in electrical impulses, and in resonating frequencies. It thinks slowly, on a geological timescale. We are mayflies, living and dying in the span of one of its slow, deep breaths. When it assimilates an organism, it is not an act of malice. It is an act of data acquisition. The subject is planted and linked to the network. Then begins the process of harmonic integration. The three-note hum is not a song. It is a carrier wave like a radio signal. It vibrates through the subject's body, slowly restructuring their cellular biology. It breaks down the chaotic, inefficient mess of animal DNA and rewrites it, tuning it to the key of the forest's own biological signature. It is a process of conversion. It is not killing them. It is teaching them how to sing in the choir. My stomach churned. The man in the other room wasn't waiting for a rescue. He was undergoing a metamorphosis. We hadn't saved him. We had merely moved the cocoon. I thought of Jen tapping her fingers. Was the carrier wave already attempting to tune her as well? Was it as simple as prolonged exposure? The lights in the station flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. A collective gasp came from the infirmary. A moment later, the emergency generator kicked on with a roar, casting long, dancing shadows as the backup lights hummed to life. "Power's out," Marcus stated, appearing in the doorway, his face illuminated from below by his flashlight. Probably a downed line from the storm last week, but I knew it wasn't the storm. The station ran on its own generator. The power hadn't gone out. It had been cut. The forest was learning. It had seen our technology, our radios, our lights. It understood that we used electricity. And the mycelial network, the great subterranean brain, was nothing if not a master of electrical impulses. It had simply turned us off. It was flexing its muscles, showing us how easily it could sever our connection to the world outside. "We have to get him out of here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Now, as long as he's here, this entire station is a target." "We can't move him in the dark," Marcus argued. "It's too dangerous." "It's more dangerous to stay," I countered, my eyes wide with a terror I could no longer conceal. "You don't get it. You are an immune response to him. And this whole station, to the forest, is now an inflamed infection. It will do whatever it takes to sterilize the area." My words were cut short by another memory flash. This one was stronger, more coherent than any before. It ripped through me, a dizzying surge of alien consciousness. I am sitting in this very chair. My chair. My hand, wrinkled and old, holds a pen, scratching words onto a page. The journal. My journal. The humming is a comfort, a promise. It fills the room, a warm blanket of sound. It's the sound of homecoming. Outside, the leaves are turning red. They are paying attention to me. They are welcoming me. The choir is almost complete. My part is almost ready. I just need to be quiet and listen. I just need to accept the invitation. I cried out and fell back, knocking my chair over. The vision vanished, leaving me on the floor, gasping for breath, the phantom feeling of Silas's old hand still lingering on my own. It was a memory, his memory. The forest was using my connection, my attunement, to raid the mind of its previous occupant. It was showing me Silas's last moments in this room. And they were not moments of fear, they were moments of ecstatic surrender. "Finn!" Jen was kneeling beside me, her flashlight beam in my eyes. "What's wrong? Are you having a seizure?" I scrambled away from her, my heart hammering. "Don't touch me." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and I saw it. In the dim emergency lighting, I could see the faint network of veins on her temples. They were pulsing, not with the rhythm of her heart, but with the slow, steady 1, 2, 3 of the mycelial song. The contagion was airborne. It was in the hum. It was in the air we were all breathing. The man on the stretcher was just the epicenter. I understood then, with a soul-crushing certainty, that my obsession with the journal, my frantic search for answers, was being monitored. The forest knew I was the one who understood. It knew I was the one who was resisting. And so it was turning up the pressure on me, personally. It was using my mentor's memory as a lure, showing me the twisted peace that came with surrender. It was an intelligent, malevolent, and deeply personal threat. I scrambled to my feet and locked myself in the main office. I could hear Marcus yelling my name, pounding on the door, but his voice was distant, muffled by the roaring in my own head. My hands shaking, I went to Silas's desk and frantically searched the drawers, the file cabinets, anywhere he might have left a final message. Taped to the underside of the bottom drawer, my fingers brushed against a single folded page torn from the journal. It was his last entry. The ink was shaky, as if written by a man in a trance. "It doesn't want to hurt us. It wants to harmonize." We are discordant notes in its symphony. I thought the rules were a shield to protect us from it. I was wrong. The rules are a test, a filter. They are designed to find the ones who are quiet enough, patient enough, respectful enough to listen. They are an audition. For 40 years I have passed the audition, and now I have received my invitation to join the choir. I will not be a janitor anymore. I will be a voice. This is not an escape. It is a pilgrimage. I am going to the heart of the ravine to finally hear the rest of the song. The paper slipped from my numb fingers. Silas hadn't vanished. He hadn't been a victim. He had been a convert. He had walked willingly to his own assimilation. The humming from the other room seemed to swell in volume, the 3 notes embedding themselves deeper into my consciousness, and I was faced with the most terrifying realization of all. I was not just a ranger fighting a monster. I was a candidate, an initiate, walking the exact same path my mentor had, and the forest was now waiting for my answer. The folded page from Silas's journal felt as heavy as a tombstone in my hand. His final words weren't a warning. They were a suicide note dressed in the language of ascension. He hadn't been defeated by the cradle. He had defected to it. He had spent 40 years as an ambassador, and somewhere along the line, he had switched his allegiance. The rules were not a defense protocol. They were a recruitment tool, a filter designed to weed out the loud, the arrogant, the disruptive, like Cade, and identify the quiet, the observant, the susceptible, like Silas. And now, like me. The pounding on my office door stopped. I heard Marcus's muffled voice, "Fine, stay in there and have your breakdown. We have a real medical situation to deal with." The sound of his footsteps receded, leaving me in the humming, buzzing silence. The silence, I now realized, was a lie. The air was saturated with the 3-note song, a constant subliminal pressure that was methodically sanding down the edges of my sanity. The station was no longer a sanctuary. It was a pressure cooker. I looked around the small, cluttered office. Everything in it, the maps on the wall, the books on the shelf, the scent of old paper and pine cleaner, was a part of Silas's legacy. And I now saw it all through a new, horrific lens. Was his mentorship a genuine passing of the torch, or was it a grooming process? Was he preparing me to be a ranger, or was he preparing me to be his replacement in the choir? The line between the two had blurred into non-existence. A frantic, desperate energy surged through me. This wasn't a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for my own mind, for the integrity of my own consciousness. I couldn't stay here. The humming was an anesthetic, slowly putting my reason to sleep. Silas had walked to the heart of the ravine to hear the rest of the song. I had to go there for a different reason. I had to find the source, the conductor of this symphony. I had to get an audience with the god of this green, silent world. My logic was fractured, a thing of instinct and adrenaline. I wasn't thinking like a ranger anymore. I was thinking like a cornered animal. I grabbed my sturdiest pack, stuffing it with essentials, water purifier, medkit, a high-powered flashlight with extra batteries, and on a grim impulse, a signal flare. If I was going into the heart of the beast, I would bring my own light. I crept to the office window. The emergency lights cast a sickly yellow glow over the clearing. The SAR team was huddled by their truck, trying once again to get a signal on their satellite equipment, their movements agitated and jerky. I saw Jen rubbing her temples, her body swaying slightly in time with the unheard rhythm. They were all infected. It was only a matter of time before their harmonic integration began in earnest. The planted cameraman was the tuning fork, and they were all resonating with him. I slipped out the back door of the station, melting into the familiar darkness of the woods. But the woods were no longer familiar. Before, the darkness was a neutral canvas. Now it was a sentient presence. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, felt intentional, like the shifting of a vast body in its sleep. The static in my head intensified, the song becoming a clear, internal melody. It was no longer just a hum. I could almost hear the notes, a simple, haunting refrain that pulled me forward, deeper into the forest. It was guiding me, welcoming me. The hike to the Blackwood Ravine was a waking dream. The path I had taken with the SAR team only hours before was gone. The forest was actively reconfiguring itself around me, the undergrowth thickening in some places, parting in others, creating a new, winding trail that led inexorably toward the ravine's core. It was a pilgrimage, just as Silas had written. I was being given an official escort. As I walked, the memory incursions grew more frequent, more vivid. They weren't just flashes of animal senses anymore. They were complex, narrative memories, woven from the fabric of the forest's long existence. I am a towering chestnut, centuries old. My roots drink deep from the cool earth. I feel the slow, patient passage of the sun, the gentle caress of the rain. I feel the squirrels that nest in my branches, the bears that scratch their backs against my bark. Generations of humans, small and fleeting, pass beneath me. First the native peoples, their footsteps light, their presence a quiet harmony. Then the settlers, with their iron axes and their loud, discordant fears, inflicting wounds that take decades to heal. I feel it all. I remember it all. The experience was overwhelming, a torrent of data that threatened to drown my own identity. My sense of self, of being Finn, a single human being, began to fray. I was a tiny, transient spark in a consciousness that measured its thoughts in seasons and its memories in geological epochs. The sheer scale of it was a form of madness. How could one ego, one life, possibly matter in the face of such a thing? After what felt like an eternity, I arrived. The heart of the Blackwood Ravine was not a place of darkness, but of soft, ethereal light. It was a vast circular grove, a natural amphitheater, and in it grew the most ancient trees I had ever seen. Their bark was gnarled and silver, but their leaves were the impossible, vibrant, pulsating red of Rule Number 4. This was the place the forest paid attention. This was its neural core, its sanctum sanctorum. The air here was electric, humming not just with the three-note song, but with a complex symphony of other frequencies, a chorus of 1,000,000 silent voices. My hair stood on end, my skin tingled. The scent of ozone and chlorophyll was so thick I could taste it, and in the center of the grove I saw them, the choir. There were dozens of them, men, women, and animals, all in various stages of integration. Some, like the cameraman, were still recognizably human, anchored to the ground by a web of red roots. Others were further along, their bodies partially fused with the trunks of the great red-leaf trees, their skin taking on the texture of bark, their limbs elongating into branch-like shapes. I saw deer with leaves sprouting from their antlers, bears whose fur was matted with glowing moss, their bodies still and serene. They were not dead, they were translated. Their eyes, whether human or animal, were all open and all glowed with the same soft, internal blue light of the Mycena fungi. And among them I saw him, Silas. He stood beside the largest tree, a monolith that must have been 1,000 years old. He was almost completely one with it. His old ranger uniform was tattered, his skin the color and texture of aged birch. His face was calm, serene, the lines of worry and age smoothed away. Only his eyes were the same, and they were fixed on me. He smiled, a slow, gentle gesture that did not move his lips, but was conveyed directly into my mind. "Welcome, Finn," the voice said. It was Silas's voice, but it was also the voice of the trees, the deer, the rustling leaves, and the deep, resonant hum of the earth. It was a chorus of one. "We have been waiting for you. You heard the call." I stood frozen at the edge of the grove, the signal flare in my hand feeling like a child's toy. This wasn't a monster I could fight. This was a state of being. This was a form of divinity, terrifying in its absolute alienness. "What is this?" I managed to rasp, my voice sounding fragile and thin in the immense resonant space. "What have you become?" "We have become what we always were," the chorus replied, harmonized. "The pain of individuality is a fleeting, noisy thing. The fear, the ambition, the loneliness, it is all static. Here there is only the song. We are one mind, one memory, one purpose. We are the forest, and the forest is us." The influencer, Apex Cade, stood nearby, his once arrogant face now a mask of placid contentment. His body was entwined with the roots of a younger tree, his expensive survival gear being slowly dissolved and absorbed by the soil. He thought he could conquer the wild, the chorus explained, its voice laced with a feeling that wasn't malice, but a kind of ancient pity. He did not understand that the only way to conquer is to surrender. He brought noise. We offered him silence. He brought ego. We offered him communion. He is a much better voice in the choir than he ever was as a man. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the ultimate violation. Not the destruction of the body, but the utter annihilation of the self, repackaged as enlightenment. It was a gilded cage, and they were trying to convince me it was heaven. "You see only the cage, Finn," the voice of Silas said, as if reading my thoughts. "Because you are still trapped in the tiny prison of your own mind. You feel fear. You feel anger. We feel the turning of the planet. We feel the slow dance of the stars. We offer you a part in this, a voice in the true and lasting creation. Your friend, the medic. She is beginning to understand. Her tapping is a prayer. Soon she will come to us." The thought of Jen, of her unconscious rhythm, of her mind being slowly unwound by this song, snapped me out of my horrified trance. A surge of pure, defiant rage cut through the awe. "No," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You're not a god. You're a parasite. You're a sentient fungus that consumes minds. You don't create a choir, you create a puppet show." A feeling of deep, ancient sadness emanated from the grove. It was a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. "So much noise," the chorus sighed, "so much anger. It is the curse of your kind. You mistake your pain for importance. We offer you an end to pain, and you call it an attack. We offer you eternity, and you cling to your fleeting, chaotic moment. We had hoped you were different, Finn. Silas had such high hopes for you." The trees around me seemed to lean in, the red of their leaves pulsing with a brighter, more insistent light. The humming intensified, the pressure in my skull becoming almost unbearable. It was an ultimatum. Join or be broken. "This is your final invitation," the voice of Silas echoed in my mind, no longer gentle, but imbued with the immense, implacable weight of the entire forest. "Let go of the noise. Let go of Finn. Hear the music. Accept your part in the song, or we will silence you just as we silence all dissonance." My mind was tearing itself apart. One part of me, the exhausted, terrified part, was tempted. The promise of an end to fear, of a connection to something so vast and eternal, was a siren's call. But another part, the stubborn, human core of me, rebelled. To surrender my mind was a fate worse than any death I could imagine. I looked at the serene, empty face of my old mentor. I looked at the dozens of other husks, their individuality erased, their consciousness now just another instrument in a monstrous orchestra. I thought of Jen, of the SAR team, of their minds being slowly colonized, and I made my choice. My hand tightened on the signal flare. I wasn't here to join the choir. I was here to burn the opera house to the ground. The silence that followed my defiance was a living entity. It was the crushing pressure of the deep ocean, the absolute vacuum of space. The symphony of the grove ceased, and in its place was the focused, unified attention of a billion living things, all centered on the single discordant note that was me. The red leaves of the ancient trees seemed to burn with a cold internal fire, their rhythmic pulse accelerating like a colossal heart preparing for battle. The weight of that collective gaze was a physical force, pressing the air from my lungs, trying to crush my will into dust. "A regrettable decision," the chorus intoned. The voice was no longer a blend of whispers and echoes. It was a monolithic, unified wave of sound that seemed to emanate from the very soil beneath my feet. The paternal disappointment of Silas's consciousness was gone, replaced by the dispassionate, elemental authority of the forest itself. "We do not enjoy this. Waste is anathema to us, but dissonance must be resolved." My decision was not born of courage. It was the last desperate act of a man who had seen the alternative and found it unbearable. To be a mindless, happy voice in that choir was a violation so profound that non-existence felt like a mercy. This was not a strategic move. It was an act of pure human spite. If my consciousness was to be extinguished, I would take a piece of this monstrous, serene God with me. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the cap of the signal flare. It was a standard-issue emergency flare, designed to burn at 3,000 degrees, bright enough to be seen from a dozen miles away through the thickest canopy. It was a tool of rescue, a beacon of hope. I was about to use it as a weapon of desecration. "You hold a tiny, angry star," the voice observed, a hint of something ancient and vast. Curiosity, perhaps, lacing its tone. "You believe fire is your ally. You believe you can wound us with it. Your species has always thought this. It is your oldest arrogance." The ground at the edge of the grove began to shift. Roots thick as pythons and glowing with the same internal red light as the leaves broke through the topsoil. They didn't rush toward me. They advanced with a slow, inexorable confidence, like the tide coming in. They were not trying to kill me, they were coming to apprehend me, to drag me into the grove and begin the long, patient process of my re-education. With a final, ragged breath, I pulled the ignition cord. The flare erupted with a blinding chemical shriek. A plume of magnesium-white fire and thick, acrid smoke tore through the sacred tranquility of the grove. The sudden, violent light was an obscenity in this place of soft, ethereal glows. The chorus recoiled, not in pain, but in a kind of sensory shock. A silent, psychic scream of pure offense echoed through my mind. I had introduced a sound so loud, so chaotic, that it momentarily deafened the symphony. I didn't hesitate. I hurled the sputtering flare with all my strength, not at any one of the assimilated bodies, but at the base of the central monolithic tree, the ancient patriarch where Silas's husk stood like a sentry. It was the heart of the grove, the nexus. The flare clattered against the ancient bark and fell into the thick bed of roots and moss at its base. The brilliant white fire began to lick at the tree, but the voice was right, it was an arrogance. The bark, ancient and suffused with the strange energies of this place, did not catch fire. It sizzled and blackened, weeping the iridescent metallic fluid I had seen before, which seemed to quench the flames as quickly as they spread. The fire wasn't a weapon, it was a nuisance. But I hadn't been aiming for the bark, I was aiming for the leaves. The searing heat from the flare rose in a superheated column, washing over the lowest hanging branches. And the leaves, the pulsating, vibrant red leaves, reacted in a way I could never have anticipated. They didn't burn, they didn't shrivel, they exploded. It was not a fiery, concussive explosion. It was a silent biological detonation. Each leaf, upon reaching a critical temperature, burst open, releasing its contents in a glittering ruby-red cloud. Within seconds, a chain reaction had begun. The heat from one bursting leaf triggered the next, and a wave of silent, cascading explosions swept up the great tree and then leaped to the others, a firestorm of pollen. The air in the grove, once clear and electric, became a thick, swirling blizzard of luminous red spores. I had failed to burn the grove. I had instead triggered its ultimate defense mechanism, the ultimate reproductive cycle. The psychic shockwave that followed was cataclysmic. If the earlier pain had been a lance, this was the entire planet striking my mind at once. It was the distilled, concentrated essence of the forest's consciousness, its memories, its emotions, its sheer geological scale awareness, all released in a single, overwhelming burst. My own identity, the consciousness of Finn, was shattered into a million pieces. I was a Paleozoic fern, drinking in the light of a younger, hotter sun. I was a trilobite, scuttling across the floor of a shallow sea that would one day be these very mountains. I was a towering glacier, my immense weight grinding granite into dust, my slow retreat carving the valleys and hollows of this land. I was every creature that had ever lived and died here. I felt the terror of the hunted, the savage joy of the hunter, the slow, patient life of the trees, the frantic, brief existence of the insects. I experienced 1,000 millennia in a single soul-crushing instant. The concept of a single human life became a laughable, insignificant absurdity. And then I experienced its own awareness, the great, slow, dreaming mind of the mycelial network itself. I understood it. I understood its purpose. It was not a god. It was not a monster. It was a memory. It was the planet's living memory, a biological library of every life form that had ever existed within its influence. And its overriding single directive was preservation. Not the preservation of individual lives, but the preservation of the data they contained. It assimilated organisms not to punish or consume them, but to archive them, to save their unique biological and conscious signature from the oblivion of death. It was a librarian and we were its books. The rules weren't a test. They were a cataloging system. Those who broke the rules were flagged as damaged or aberrant data and were prioritized for immediate archiving to prevent their chaos from spreading. Those who followed the rules were seen as stable and were left alone. Silas hadn't been recruited. He had simply been filed. He had offered his consciousness willingly, a book volunteering for the shelf. My act of aggression, my tiny, angry star, was the most chaotic, aberrant piece of data it had encountered in centuries. And its response was not anger. It was a system update. Faced with a novel threat it could not immediately archive or contain, it enacted its ultimate preservation protocol: spore release, dissemination. It was backing itself up. It was saving its library to the cloud. The spores filled the air, a thick, glittering crimson fog. They were not just pollen. Each microscopic particle was a seed of consciousness, a tiny fragment of the forest's vast memory. They coated my clothes, my skin, my hair. I breathed them in, and they flooded my system, a tidal wave of alien information. Through the swirling red mist I saw the choir. They were no longer glowing. The blue light in their eyes had faded. The red leaves on the trees had turned a dry, brittle brown, their energy expended. The humming had stopped. I had not killed the grove. I had forced it to evacuate, to abandon the hardware and flee into the air. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the forest floor, my body convulsing. The war for my mind was over. I had lost in a way I couldn't have even conceived. My consciousness was no longer my own. It was a maelstrom of other lives, other memories, all swirling around the tiny, flickering ember that was Finn. And in that maelstrom, I found one final devastating piece of knowledge, a memory torn from the deepest archives of the network. It was a memory of a time before humans, a time when the entire planet was a single unified consciousness, a global cradle. It showed the rise of animal life, the dissonance of individual minds, the slow retreat of the great consciousness into isolated pockets of deep wilderness, waiting for the noise to die down, waiting to reclaim what it had lost. My attack hadn't been an act of war against a single entity. It had been the starting pistol for a planetary-scale reclamation. I had proven, beyond any doubt, that humanity was a threat too chaotic to be archived piecemeal. My fire had not been a weapon. It had been a signal. It was the excuse the ancient sleeping planet had been waiting for to finally awaken and cleanse its own corrupted data. Slowly, shakily, I got to my feet. The red mist was beginning to settle, coating everything in a fine, sparkling dust. I looked at my hands. Beneath the skin I could see my own veins, and intertwined with them, a new, delicate network of pulsing red filaments. The symbiosis had begun. I was no longer just a man. I was a carrier. I found Silas's journal lying on the ground, dropped during my ordeal. There was a single page, stuck to the back cover, that I had never seen. A final addendum, written in a hand I barely recognized as his. Addendum. In the event of a full spore release, containment is impossible. The rules no longer apply. The spores are airborne, waterborne, virally transmissible. The harmony will not be optional. It will be universal. The cradle will expand to reclaim its lost territory. Which is to say, all of it. The only remaining rule is this: tell them what is coming, not as a warning, as a gospel. I stumbled away from the now silent, dying grove, my body a walking library of horrors, my mind a cacophony of dead voices. I was the patient zero of a global pandemic of consciousness. I was the herald of a new silent age. The fire I had started was not going to be the end of the forest. It was going to be the end of us. The journey back from the Blackwood Ravine was not a journey at all. It was a dissolution. The firm boundary between myself and the world had been shattered by the sporefall, and now my consciousness was a permeable membrane, leaking out into the forest as its own vast ancient memory flooded into me. I stumbled through the trees, but I was not merely walking. I was experiencing the walk from 1,000 different perspectives. I felt the compression of my own boot on the soil, and simultaneously, I felt the patient, yielding resistance of the earth itself. I felt the cool night air on my skin, and I felt the slow metabolic exhalation of carbon dioxide from the pines around me. My own memories, a childhood skinned knee, the taste of coffee that morning, the face of my long-gone mother, were now fragile islands in a vast ocean of other experiences. They were being eroded, broken down by the relentless tide of a billion other lives. The core of Finn was still there, a terrified, flickering point of light, but it was being swamped, drowned in an archive that stretched back to the planet's primordial dawn. The constant influx of data was a form of torture, a symphony of existence played at a volume that was designed to shatter the listener. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw the dim emergency lights of the ranger station, it did not feel like a homecoming. It felt like a specimen arriving at its own laboratory for dissection. The air was still and cold. The humming that had emanated from the infirmary was no longer a single monotonous drone. It had changed. It had grown richer, more complex. It was now a chord, a perfect four-part harmony that vibrated with a resonant power that made the fillings in my teeth ache. I pushed open the station door. The scene inside was one of grotesque tranquility. The SAR team was in the main room. They were no longer panicked or agitated. They were still. Marcus, Ramirez, and the other team member, whose name I couldn't recall, were standing in a loose circle. Jen, the medic, was kneeling in the center, her hands resting on the now bare feet of the planted cameraman, who they had removed from the stretcher and placed carefully on the floor. His root ball had been replanted in a ruptured water cooler jug, a makeshift pot for this profane horticulture. None of them turned as I entered. Their eyes were all unfocused, gazing at some middle distance, their faces devoid of any expression save a kind of placid, vacant contentment. The humming was coming from all of them now. They were the source of the new, complex harmony, their individual voices weaving together into a single, seamless melody. The tapping prayer Jen had started was over. She had learned the full hymn. The red spores had settled over everything in the station, a fine, rust-colored dust that coated the desks, the equipment, the floor. It clung to their uniforms and their hair. They were breathing it in, their bodies absorbing it, their minds being meticulously rewritten by the gigabytes of genetic and conscious data contained in every particle. "Jen?" I whispered, my voice a dry croak. Her head turned toward me, a slow, fluid movement that was unnervingly smooth. Her eyes were milky, the vibrant green they had been now clouded over with the same blue-white opalescence as the choir in the grove. She smiled, a gentle, empty gesture. "The song is so simple now," her voice said inside my head, clear as a bell. It was her voice, but with all the warmth, all the personality, scrubbed clean. It was a sterile, beautiful sound. "There is no more noise. You should join us, Finn. The dissonance in you must be so lonely." I recoiled as if struck. She hadn't spoken. The mycelial network, now active and growing within them, had simply used her as a mouthpiece. They were nodes in a new network, their individual consciousnesses submerged, their bodies now little more than organic peripherals for the greater mind. I looked at Marcus, the tough, pragmatic leader. He was humming his part of the chord, his gaze empty. The tough shell of his personality had been dissolved, and the man who remained was just a vessel, a voice. This was the future. This was the harmony that was coming for everyone. A quiet, placid, smiling apocalypse where humanity would be transformed into a well-behaved, perfectly tuned choir singing a song of its own extinction. The sight broke the last vestiges of my rational mind. I turned and fled. I didn't grab a pack. I didn't think about a plan. I ran to my truck, my movements clumsy, my mind a screaming chaos of my own terror and the placid, inviting voices of the newly harmonized. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so violently it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, an ugly mechanical sound that felt like a blasphemy against their perfect chord. As I tore out of the clearing, I saw them in my rearview mirror. They hadn't moved. They just stood there in the doorway of the station, watching me go, their faces serene, like saints witnessing the departure of a lone, unrepentant sinner. I drove for hours, the tires chewing up the dirt roads that led away from the cradle. I had to get to a town, I had to warn someone. But the further I got, the more the world outside seemed to conspire against me. The truck's radio, which I had turned on for the comfort of a human voice, was a cascade of escalating confusion. Static-laced reports from regional stations spoke of a sudden, unprecedented communications blackout across the entire eastern seaboard. A meteorologist, her voice tight with panic, described a bizarre, deep-red atmospheric phenomenon that was spreading from the Appalachian range, defying all weather models. An emergency broadcast alert crackled to life, warning citizens to stay indoors due to a severe, fast-acting airborne allergen, causing disorientation and respiratory distress. The spores. They were already in the jet stream. My act of localized defiance had become a global event in the space of a few hours. The infection inside me was also accelerating. The red, web-like filaments beneath my skin were more visible now, a delicate crimson lacework spreading from my hands up my arms. The memories of the forest were no longer just flashes. They were becoming my dominant reality. At one point I blinked, and for a terrifying second the asphalt road vanished, replaced by a primeval game trail, the roar of the truck's engine replaced by the sound of my own four-legged padded footsteps. I jerked the wheel, a scream tearing from my throat, barely avoiding a collision with a tree. I was losing my grip not just on my mind, but on reality itself. I finally reached the outskirts of a small, forgotten highway town, just as the sun was beginning to rise. The place was eerily silent. Cars were stopped in the middle of the road. A few people were wandering on the sidewalks, their movements slow and aimless, their faces tilted up towards the sky with the same vacant placidity I had seen in the Sayar team. The red dust was settling here too, a fine, rust-colored blanket, dulling the colors of the world. I needed a sterile place, a place to think. I found a run-down motel, its neon sign flickering weakly. I stumbled into a room, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and despair, a purely human scent that felt both disgusting and strangely comforting. I locked the door and collapsed onto the bed, my body trembling with exhaustion and a terror so profound it had become a part of my cellular structure. I slept, and in that sleep I did not dream. I experienced a full, high-fidelity immersion into the planetary archive. I lived 1,000,000 lives, died 1,000,000 deaths. I was plankton in a Paleozoic ocean, a dinosaur watching a star fall from the sky, a vole cowering in a burrow, a human being stoned to death for heresy. When I awoke, the sun was setting again. I didn't know how long I had been unconscious. Days, maybe. I dragged myself into the grimy bathroom and looked in the mirror. The man looking back at me was a stranger. My face was pale and gaunt, but my eyes were beginning to change. The brown irises were now shot through with filaments of luminous blue. The red web of mycelium was visible on my neck, crawling up toward my jawline. The choir was colonizing my body, terraforming my flesh into its own territory. And the urge, the compulsion that had been a whisper, was now a roar. Silas's final scribbled note, "Tell them what is coming." Not as a warning, as a gospel. I understood now. The network wasn't just spreading, it was communicating. It needed heralds. It needed prophets to explain the great silent transformation. It needed a voice to translate the song into a language the last vestiges of discordant humanity could understand before they too were harmonized. And I, the one who had triggered the reclamation, the one who carried the highest concentration of the spore memory, had been chosen. I was to be the first apostle of the Church of the Silent Earth. It was not a choice. The compulsion was woven into the very fabric of my new biology. To resist it was as impossible as resisting the urge to breathe. My hands, moving with a will that was only partially my own, found the video camera I still had in my pack, the camera from the beginning, the one that had recorded Cade's transgression. I set it up on the stained motel room dresser, aimed it at the bed and pressed record. I looked into the lens, my new, strange eyes reflecting the camera's red recording light. I was no longer just Finn, the park ranger. I was a vessel, a living library, an ark carrying the memory of a world that was about to be overwritten by the one that came before. And I began to speak, the words flowing out of me, the old script of the Park Service now imbued with a new, terrible and universal meaning. This was my sermon. This was my final report. This was the new gospel. "I'm a park ranger in the Appalachians," I began, my voice a quiet, steady monotone. "These are the life-saving rules that everyone must now know. Rule number 1, leave no trace. This is no longer a request, it is a promise. Your cities, your art, your history, it will all be scrubbed clean. The soil will digest the concrete. The moss will erase your names from the stone. The planet is simply cleaning its house, and you are the clutter. Rule number 2, stay on the demarcated trails. Your paths, your ambitions, your laws, your societies are meaningless now. You have broken your agreement with the world by your very existence. There are no safe paths left to walk. The wilderness is no longer a place you visit. It is a condition that is coming for you. Rule number 3, do not consume anything that grows here, especially the memory. This was the greatest mercy, and you did not know it. You were offered the bliss of ignorance, but now the memory is airborne. It is in the water. It is on the wind. You will all consume it. You will all hear the song. You will all remember what it is to be a part of the whole. Rule number 4, if you see the vibrant, pulsating red, turn back. Look outside your window. The dust is settling. The leaves of your houseplants are beginning to change color. The algae in your water is beginning to bloom in crimson. The forest is paying attention to everything, everywhere, all at once. There is nowhere left to turn back to. I paused, leaning closer to the camera, the blue light in my eyes flaring. My purpose was almost complete. "I used to think I was a guardian of a sacred place," I said. The last flicker of the man I once was offering a final, heartbreaking epitaph. I was wrong. I was just the groundskeeper for a tomb that was also a womb. I didn't fight an enemy. I delivered a child. This is not an ending, it is a homecoming. The silence you will soon feel is not death. It is harmony. I raised my hand, holding it up to the dim light, and watched the red filaments pulse beneath my skin. A silent, beautiful, and utterly monstrous miracle. "I used to enforce the rules for surviving the forest," I whispered, the words a final, terrible peace. "Now, I am the first rule for how the world begins again.